Power is a dangerous drug, especially when it arrives with a badge and a gun. But arrogance is the quiet poison that seeps into the soul and destroys the very hand that wields it. Officer Owen Dempsey believed himself untouchable on that blistering Tuesday afternoon in mid-July, the 16th to be precise. He spotted a sleek luxury sedan parked near the Fulton County Courthouse and decided to have it towed out of pure, petty racial spite. He wanted to teach the driver a lesson about who really owned the streets of Atlanta. Dempsey made one fatal mistake. The car belonged to the new district attorney. Robert Callaway was not the kind of man to simply retrieve his vehicle and move on. He was going to dismantle the officer's entire world, piece by relentless piece, with the cold, surgical precision of the law. Fulton County, Georgia, was a place of two starkly different realities, divided by the murky, slow-moving waters of the Chattahoochee River. North of the river, in neighborhoods like Buckhead, manicured lawns and gated driveways concealed old money and the quiet confidence of generational power. South of it, in communities clustered around the Carver homes and along the cracked arteries of the South Side, flickering streetlights watched over residents who had been over-policed and underprotected for generations. Robert Callaway had grown up on that South Side. He remembered the way his mother counted every dollar, the way neighbors whispered about the latest Dempsey special, a tow that left a family stranded for weeks and a refrigerator empty. Those memories had never left him. Now, at 42, he occupied the corner office in the historic Fulton County Courthouse as the newly elected district attorney, the first black DA in the county's history. Callaway was a force of nature, tall, impeccably tailored, with a mind like a steel trap and a quiet intensity that made powerful men listen when he spoke. He had campaigned on a single, unwavering promise: accountability, and his victory had sent shockwaves through Atlanta's political establishment. Nowhere did those tremors hit harder than in the precinct houses of the Atlanta Police Department. Officer Owen Dempsey was a relic of the old Atlanta. A 15-year veteran, thick-necked and heavy-handed, he viewed the streets as his personal domain. To Dempsey, the law was whatever he decided it was at any given moment. He had accumulated 24 citizen complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation, but the union and a sympathetic old guard chief had buried every last one. Dempsey hated Robert Callaway with a visceral, consuming passion. He hated the reform policies, the mandatory body camera audits, and the uncomfortable truth that a black man from the South Side now held the power to send cops to prison. It was a blistering Tuesday afternoon in mid-July, the air shimmering above the asphalt like a living thing, thick with the scent of hot tar and desperation. Callaway had just finished a grueling 4-hour grand jury presentation on a corrupt city contractor. Exhausted but razor-sharp, he parked his pristine midnight blue 2022 Audi A6 in the overflow municipal lot off Mitchell Street, a block from the courthouse. The space was reserved for county officials. His laminated placard sat dead center on the dashboard. Dempsey was cruising his sector in car 42, air conditioning blasting, a wad of chewing tobacco tucked behind his lip, turning his saliva muddy brown. He was already in a foul mood. Earlier that week, Callaway's office had refused to prosecute a drug possession case Dempsey had brought in, citing an illegal warrantless search. Dempsey felt humiliated, emasculated. As he turned onto Mitchell Street, the midnight blue Audi caught his eye. He knew exactly whose car it was. The precinct grapevine moved faster than fiber optic cable. Every cop in the building knew the new DA drove a dark blue Audi. Dempsey eased his cruiser up to the bumper and tapped the plate into his mobile data terminal. The screen flashed back. Registered owner, Robert A. Callaway. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. He studied the parking space. The Audi was perfectly centered, the placard clearly visible, yet the rear left tire rested perhaps 2 inches over the faded white line that separated the county lot from a long unused fire lane. A lane that had not seen a fire truck or fresh paint since the adjacent building came down 6 years earlier. To any rational officer, it was nothing. To Dempsey, it was opportunity. "Let's see how high and mighty you feel when you're riding the bus, counselor," he muttered. He did not call city dispatch. That would leave a paper trail a supervisor might notice. Instead, he reached for his personal cell and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Higgins Towing, Stan speaking." "Stan, it's Tommy," Dempsey said, eyes locked on the DA's car. "I got a live one for you down on Mitchell, right behind the courthouse annex, impeding a fire lane, real public safety hazard." Stan Higgins chuckled, a wet, phlegmy sound. "Right behind the courthouse? You sure about this, Tommy? That's heavy brass territory." "Just hook it and book it, Stan," Dempsey sneered. "Take it all the way out to the yard on Fulton Industrial. Make sure this one gets the premium storage fee." "You got it, boss. Be there in 10. Dempsey sat in his idling cruiser, watching like a predator as the rusted flatbed rattled down the street. He watched Stan jump out, hook the winch to the front axle, and drag the beautiful sedan violently up the steel ramp. The screech of tires against metal was music to his ears. He did not write a ticket. He did not leave a notice. He simply watched the car disappear around the corner, spat his tobacco juice onto the pavement, and drove away feeling like the king of Fulton County once more. He had no idea he had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would obliterate his world. At 6:22 that evening, Robert Callaway loosened his silk tie, grabbed his leather briefcase, and walked out of the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The oppressive afternoon heat had given way to a muggy, stagnant evening. He was mentally reviewing his schedule, calculating the political capital he would need to persuade Mayor Richard Hughes to sign off on an independent police oversight board. He turned the corner into the municipal lot and stopped dead. The spot where he had parked was empty, nothing but a rectangle of oil-stained concrete. For one brief, irrational second, he thought he might have parked elsewhere, but his memory was photographic. He looked down. Etched into the soft, hot asphalt were fresh, deep gouges, the unmistakable drag marks of a tow winch. Callaway did not panic. He did not scream or kick a trash can. He was a man who had built his career on cold, analytical composure. He pulled out his phone and dialed the non-emergency line. "Fulton County Dispatch, Operator 44. State your emergency or inquiry. This is District Attorney Robert Callaway. I am calling to report a vehicle missing from the Mitchell Street municipal lot, or to determine if it was impounded. License plate Delta Romeo 792. A long pause, furious typing. The dispatcher's voice returned, suddenly tense. Mr. Callaway." "Yes, sir. The vehicle was towed at 2:47 p.m. today. The authorizing officer was Officer Owen Dempsey, badge 714. Cited for impeding a designated emergency fire zone." Callaway's eyes narrowed. He knew Dempsey's name. It sat at the top of a very thick file on his desk. "Which impound lot, operator?" "Higgins Towing, sir. Out on Fulton Industrial Boulevard." "Thank you." Callaway hung up. He did not call the chief to complain. He did not demand a squad car. He simply opened his Uber app and requested a ride. The drive out to Fulton Industrial Boulevard took 43 minutes. Higgins Towing was a sprawling dirt lot, a graveyard of wrecked metal surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire on the industrial edge of the county. The smell of diesel fuel and rotting garbage hung heavy in the humid air. Callaway walked into the tiny, stifling portable office. Behind scratched bulletproof glass sat Stan Higgins, heavy-set, grease-stained hands, a smug expression. "Help you?" Stan grunted, not looking up from a dirty tabloid. "I am here to retrieve my vehicle, 2022 Audi A6, Callaway said, voice smooth and dangerously calm. Stan punched keys on an ancient computer. Yeah, I got it, impeding a fire lane. $250 hook fee, $100 for the dolly, $75 overnight storage. Total $425. Cash only. Callaway looked through the glass. In the back office, the door was cracked. Sitting on a folding chair, drinking a can of cheap beer and laughing silently, was Officer Owen Dempsey. Dempsey locked eyes with Callaway, raised his beer in a mock toast, and let out a booming laugh. It was a blatant display of power. A message: I can take your property, I can inconvenience you, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Callaway did not break eye contact. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, and counted out $425 in crisp bills. He slid them under the slot. I need an itemized stamped receipt, he said, and a copy of the police authorization form. Whatever, Stan muttered, snatching the cash and printing a crude receipt. Sign the release. Callaway walked out to the dirt lot. His beautiful car was covered in thick dust. He walked around it slowly, noticing deep, fresh scratches on the front lower bumper where the winch chains had been improperly secured. He took out his phone and meticulously photographed the damage, the license plate, the surroundings, the receipt. He climbed in, started the engine, and as he drove out of the gates, he saw Dempsey standing by his cruiser, a smirk plastered across his face. Callaway did not scowl. He did not flip him off. As the air conditioning cooled his face, his mind was already shifting into a gear Dempsey could not possibly comprehend. Dempsey thought this was a street fight, a turf war he had won. But Robert Callaway did not fight in the streets. He fought in courtrooms, and he was about to unleash a legal reckoning upon the Atlanta Police Department. The next morning, the district attorney's office hummed at a terrifyingly quiet frequency. Callaway arrived at 6 a.m. By 7, he had summoned his chief investigator, Lucy Jenkins, into his office. Jenkins was a former FBI forensic accountant who had left the bureau for a quieter life, only to find herself deeply bored until Callaway hired her. Brilliant, relentless, with a deeply cynical view of local law enforcement, Callaway slid the Higgins receipt and the photographs across his mahogany desk. Officer Owen Dempsey had my car illegally towed yesterday, Callaway said flatly. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. Are you kidding me? He towed the DA's car? The hubris is almost impressive. It is not hubris, Lucy. It is an illusion of invulnerability, Callaway replied, steepling his fingers. He did it to embarrass me. He did it because he thinks the badge makes him a king. But what caught my attention was not the tow itself. It was the operation at Higgins Towing, cash only, exorbitant fees, and Dempsey was sitting in the back office drinking a beer while I paid it. Jenkins sat up straighter. You think they are running a racket? I do not think it. I know it, Callaway said. A cop like Dempsey does not spontaneously decide to use a specific tow company. There is a relationship. I want you to pull every single parking violation, impound record, and tow authorization issued by Officer Owen Dempsey over the last 5 years. Cross-reference them with Higgins Towing. Then a full financial background check on Stan Higgins, his LLC, and anyone connected. Robert, Jenkins said, dropping formalities. If we open this door, the police union is going to declare open warfare. Captain Harlan and the old guard will paralyze our prosecutions. Blue flu. Stop responding to subpoenas. Let them, Callaway said, voice hard as flint. I was elected to clean this city up. If we have to tear the precinct down to the foundation to do it, bring me a sledgehammer. For the next 3 weeks, a secret war room operated out of the windowless basement of the DA's building. Only Callaway, Jenkins, and 2 trusted paralegals had access. What they uncovered was a conspiracy so deeply entrenched and breathtakingly corrupt that it made Callaway's stomach turn. Jenkins laid out massive flowcharts on the basement walls. The data was damning. Over 5 years, Officer Dempsey had authorized more than 1,200 vehicle tows. A staggering 92% of those tows were routed exclusively to Higgins Towing, bypassing the city's rotational list of contracted bonded operators. But it was the demographics that turned corruption into a civil rights atrocity. "Look at the heat map, Robert," Jenkins said, pointing a laser at a massive map of Fulton County. The north side, wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods around Buckhead, was virtually blank, but the south side was covered in red dots. "He is targeting minority neighborhoods, low-income housing, apartment complexes, factory parking lots. He targets people who cannot afford to fight back. Single mothers, shift workers, immigrants. He fabricates violations, blocking sidewalks that do not exist, expired tags that are not expired, and calls Stan Higgins. Higgins tows the car and demands a minimum of $400 cash to release it." "And if they cannot pay?" Callaway asked. After 30 days, Higgins claims abandoned property, files a mechanic's lien, and auctions the cars off. Sometimes he just scraps them. Jenkins pulled out a financial dossier. "But here is the kill shot, Robert. I dug into the corporate structure of Higgins Towing LLC. Stan Higgins is not the sole owner." She slapped a printout from the Secretary of State's office onto the table. "Higgins is the registered agent. The silent partner holding a 50% equity stake through a shell corporation called Blue Line Logistics is a woman named Brenda Higgins." Callaway stared at the name. "His wife?" "Yes," Jenkins said grimly. "Brenda Higgins, whose maiden name is Brenda Dempsey. She is Owen Dempsey's younger sister." The puzzle pieces locked together with a deafening click. It was not petty harassment. It was a massive, highly organized racketeering enterprise. Dempsey used his badge to steal cars from poor people under color of law. His brother-in-law held the cars hostage for cash, and the profits funneled right back into Dempsey's pockets through his sister's shell company. Over 5 years, they had extorted nearly $1 million from the most vulnerable citizens of Fulton County. Callaway felt a terrifying, righteous clarity wash over him. This is not a badge misconduct complaint. This is Title 18, United States Code. RICO, extortion under color of official right, wire fraud, civil rights violations. If we take this to a grand jury locally, it will leak. Captain Harlan has moles in the clerk's office. "We are not going local," Callaway said softly. "I am calling the state attorney general, and we are bringing in the Civil Rights Division of the FBI." Oblivious to the sword dangling over his neck, Dempsey's arrogance only grew. Believing he had successfully intimidated the DA, he began openly taunting Callaway's staff. A week after the tow, Dempsey pulled over Evelyn Reed, Callaway's chief of staff, a brilliant young lawyer instrumental in drafting the police reform bills. It was raining hard. Dempsey walked up to her window, shining his heavy maglite directly into her eyes. "License and registration," he barked. "Officer, what is the reason for this stop?" Evelyn asked, shielding her eyes, voice shaking slightly, but firm. "Broken tail light," Dempsey lied smoothly. He leaned in closer, breath smelling of stale tobacco. "You work for Callaway, don't you?" "Yes, I do," she replied. "Tell your boss to watch where he parks," Dempsey whispered, a nasty, threatening edge to his voice. "Streets are dangerous. Bad things happen to nice cars." He did not write her a ticket. He simply walked away, leaving her sitting in the rain, trembling with anger. When Evelyn reported it the next morning, Callaway did not react with anger. He simply nodded slowly. Dempsey was digging his own grave with a backhoe. Callaway picked up his secure phone and dialed the private cell of David Rosen, the lead federal prosecutor for the district. "David, it is Robert. I have a package for you. It is a localized RICO conspiracy involving the Atlanta Police Department. I have the paper trail, the financial links, and a clear pattern of civil rights violations." "How big?" Rosen asked. "Big enough to end careers," Callaway promised. "We need Title III wiretaps on 3 phones, and we need them yesterday. I want to hear every word Owen Dempsey and Stan Higgins say to each other." The federal machine woke up. For the next 2 months, Dempsey and Higgins were the unwitting stars of their own FBI reality show. Agents sat in vans half a mile from Higgins' towing, listening in real time as Dempsey casually called in fake tows, laughed about targeting minorities, and explicitly demanded his cut of the cash on recorded lines. The net was woven tight. There were no holes. On a crisp Monday morning in early October, Robert Callaway stood in his office looking out at the Atlanta skyline. At precisely 6:05 a.m., a fleet of black SUVs rolled into Fulton County. The hammer was about to drop. At 6:05 a.m., on that crisp October morning, the illusion of Owen Dempsey's empire shattered. The operation was executed with the chilling, synchronized precision only the federal government could orchestrate. No local sirens, no courtesy calls to the Atlanta police chief, no warning. A convoy of matte black Ford Explorers and armored tactical vehicles descended on 3 locations simultaneously. Higgins Towing on Fulton Industrial Boulevard, the suburban home of Brenda and Stan Higgins in Sandy Springs, and a modest split-level house on the south edge of the county where Officer Owen Dempsey slept. Dempsey was jolted awake by a sound he had delivered to countless others, but never expected to hear himself. The deafening splintering of his own front door being battered off its hinges. "FBI, federal warrant, show me your hands." Dempsey scrambled out of bed, heart hammering against his ribs. He instinctively reached for his service weapon on the nightstand, but before his fingers could brush the cold steel, the bedroom door was kicked open. 3 heavily armed FBI SWAT agents flooded the room, assault rifles leveled at his chest, the blinding beam of a tactical light pinning him against the wall. "Don't even breathe toward that gun," the lead agent barked, voice devoid of professional courtesy. "Hands on your head. Turn around. Now." Dempsey, clad only in boxer shorts, raised his hands. Confusion warred with his deeply ingrained arrogance. Hold on, he stammered. "I am Atlanta PD. I am on the job. You guys are making a massive mistake. We know exactly who you are, Officer Dempsey, Special Agent in charge," Gregory Hayes said as he stepped into the room, holding a thick sheaf of papers. "Owen Dempsey, you are under arrest for violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion under color of official right, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." The words hit Dempsey like a physical blow. RICO, federal charges. The color drained from his face as the agent slammed him roughly against his dresser and ratcheted cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The terrifying reality set in. He was not dealing with internal affairs or a slap on the wrist from a friendly chief. He was in the grip of the Department of Justice. Simultaneously, at Higgins Towing, dozens of federal agents swarmed the dirt lot. They seized computers, filing cabinets, and the contents of a hidden floor safe containing more than $80,000 in undocumented cash. Stan Higgins did not even make it to the handcuffs before he broke. Standing in his pajamas in his driveway, watching agents tear apart his wife's home office, Stan immediately asked for a deal. The brotherhood with Dempsey evaporated the second Stan faced a mandatory minimum in federal prison. By 8:15 a.m., the news hit the Atlanta Police Department like a tactical nuke. Chief William Miller, red-faced and barrel-chested, the man who had protected Dempsey for years, stormed into the district attorney's office, bypassing reception. He threw open the doors to Callaway's suite, eyes bulging with rage. "What the hell is going on, Robert?" Miller roared, slamming his palms onto the DA's mahogany desk. "The feds just perp-walked one of my senior officers out of his house in his underwear. They bypassed my entire chain of command. You set this up." Callaway did not flinch. He calmly finished signing a motion, capped his fountain pen, and looked up. "Take a seat, William, or do not, but lower your voice." "You brought the FBI into my precinct over a parking dispute," Miller spat, bravado faltering under Callaway's dead-eyed stare. "You are destroying a man's life because he towed your precious Audi." "I brought the FBI into your precinct, Chief," Because you allowed a criminal enterprise to operate out of your locker room, Callaway replied, standing. He picked up a thick-bound dossier and tossed it violently at Miller's feet. It landed with a heavy thud. That is a 5-year forensic accounting of Officer Dempsey's towing history. Over 1,000 vehicles. $1 million extorted from the poorest, most vulnerable citizens of Fulton County, funneled directly into a shell company owned by Dempsey's sister. He did not just tow my car, William. He has been terrorizing the South Side under your protection. And I have it all on Title III wiretaps. Miller stared at the dossier, color washing from his face. The fight left his body. Wiretaps, financial records, RICO. The old guard playbook of sweeping things under the rug was useless against a federal grand jury indictment. The police union, Miller started weakly, will not touch him, Callaway interrupted. I spoke to the union president an hour ago. Once I read him the summary of the extortion charges and mentioned the FBI Civil Rights Division, he explicitly stated they will not fund Dempsey's legal defense. He is entirely alone. Callaway leaned over the desk, eyes burning with years of built-up frustration against a broken system. I told you I was going to clean up this city, William. Dempsey was the infection. Consider this the amputation. Now get out of my office and go try to salvage whatever is left of your department's reputation. Down in the federal holding cells, Owen Dempsey sat shivering on a stainless steel bench. For the first time in 15 years, he was entirely stripped of his power. He had used his badge as a weapon, and now it was gone. The only thing waiting was a judge, a jury, and the terrifying realization that he was about to face the very justice system he had spent his career manipulating. The criminal trial of the United States versus Owen Dempsey was not a battle. It was a clinical, methodical slaughter. From the moment the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse in Atlanta swung open, it was clear Dempsey's reign had reached its terminal conclusion. The courtroom was packed to capacity. Reporters filled the back benches. Citizens from the South Side, people who had spent years victimized in silence, lined the gallery. Federal prosecutor David Rosen moved through his case in chief with the terrifying precision of a surgeon. He did not rely on grand theatrics. He relied on an avalanche of undeniable data. For 3 days, Rosen paraded the victims of Dempsey's extortion ring before the jury. Single mothers who had lost their jobs because they could not get to work. Elderly men whose only mode of transportation had been auctioned off for pennies. Young college students whose savings were wiped out to pay Higgins towing. But the fatal blow was not the victims' tearful testimonies, nor was it Lucy Jenkins's masterful breakdown of the forensic accounting. The fatal blow was Stan Higgins. Desperate to avoid dying in a federal penitentiary, Stan had taken an aggressive plea deal and turned state's evidence. When his name was called, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. He wore a rumpled, ill-fitting suit, a stark contrast to his usual grease-stained coveralls. As he raised his right hand to swear the oath, he steadfastly refused to look at the defense table. Stan did not just throw his brother-in-law under the bus, he reversed over him. Guided by Rosen's sharp questioning, Stan detailed the entire operation from its inception. He explained the encrypted radio codes Dempsey used to signal a lucrative target. He described the cash drops that took place in brown paper bags during Sunday family barbecues, money handed over while children played in the yard. Then came the centerpiece, the ledger. Stan handed over the meticulously kept handwritten accounting book his wife Brenda had hidden beneath the floorboards of their home. Every illegal tow, every fabricated violation, every split of the cash, documented, a roadmap of pure, unadulterated corruption. Yet Rosen saved his most devastating weapon for the final afternoon. He submitted a flash drive into evidence, the Title III FBI wiretaps. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. It was a recording from late August, mere weeks before the raid. The pristine acoustics amplified Owen Dempsey's recorded voice, dripping with contempt, entitlement, and sheer arrogance. "I got another live one for you, Stan," Dempsey's voice echoed, accompanied by the faint sound of his cruiser's turn signal clicking. "Down at the Carver Homes, nice little silver Honda Civic. The tags are good and she is parked legal, but I am writing it up as a public nuisance, blocking a fire hydrant. Let the single mom ride the bus for a few weeks and think about her life choices. Make sure you hit her with the maximum overnight storage fee, brother. Daddy needs that new cedar deck for the backyard before Labor Day." A collective, audible gasp swept through the gallery. Several jurors physically recoiled, faces twisting in disgust. In the front row, Robert Callaway sat perfectly motionless, face an unreadable mask of stone, eyes fixed on the defense table. At that table, Owen Dempsey, physically shattered. The arrogant, thick-necked cop who had terrorized the streets was gone. He shrank into his chair, burying his face in his trembling hands, trying to hide from the burning stares of the jury and the public. He could not hide behind the thin blue line anymore. The entire world had just heard him for what he truly was: a predator masquerading as a protector. The next morning, before the defense attorney could even attempt a hollow opening statement, Dempsey surrendered. Approaching the bench with head bowed, his lawyer announced that Dempsey was changing his plea to guilty on all federal counts. The criminal fight was over, but Robert Callaway's war was fought on two fronts. While the federal government secured Dempsey's impending imprisonment, Callaway had quietly set the stage to obliterate the corrupt financial and political infrastructure that had allowed the officer to thrive. As a sitting district attorney, Callaway was legally barred from filing civil lawsuits against the city. But his former law school roommate and notoriously ruthless civil rights attorney, Harrison Pierce, operated under no such restrictions. The moment Dempsey's guilty plea was entered, Callaway arranged for Pierce to receive the entire unsealed federal evidence file. Armed with a mountain of judicially validated proof, Pierce filed a monstrous multi-million-dollar class action civil rights lawsuit against the city of Atlanta, the Atlanta Police Department, and Owen Dempsey personally. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal destruction. It alleged a systemic, decades-long failure to supervise, train, and discipline officers, explicitly pointing to Dempsey's 24 buried citizen complaints as undeniable proof that the city's leadership was complicit in the extortion ring. The city council and Mayor Richard Hughes panicked. The evidence was indefensible. Taking a class action suit of this magnitude to a civil jury in the current climate would result in a verdict that could bankrupt the municipality. Within weeks, the city capitulated, agreeing to a staggering $6 million settlement. This money was placed in a restitution fund for the hundreds of victims Dempsey had preyed upon. But Callaway had not engineered the lawsuit just for the money. Buried within the binding settlement agreement was a non-negotiable stipulation. Mayor Hughes was legally mandated to immediately create and fully fund the Independent Civilian Police Oversight Board, the exact institution the political establishment had spent years blocking. Seeing the writing on the wall and terrified he might be named in a secondary federal probe regarding the buried complaints, Police Chief William Miller did not wait to be fired. He quietly cleared out his office under cover of darkness and submitted his early retirement papers, fleeing the city in disgrace. And then came the bureaucratic execution that finally broke Dempsey's spirit. Because Dempsey had pleaded guilty to severe federal felonies committed while acting under color of official law, a state tribunal was convened to invoke a rarely used punitive municipal statute. In a hearing lasting less than 20 minutes, Owen Dempsey was permanently stripped of his law enforcement pension. Every dime he had paid into the retirement system over 15 years was seized and liquidated to help fund restitution payments to his victims. He was left with nothing, no savings, no future, no safety net. On the day of his formal sentencing, Dempsey stood before Federal District Judge Eleanor Vance. He wore a bright orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled to a heavy chain around his waist. He looked 20 years older, the hollow, terrified stare of a ruined man replacing the smug smirk he had worn months prior. "Mr. Dempsey," Judge Vance began, her voice echoing coldly in the cavernous room. "Law enforcement officers are granted extraordinary, almost unfathomable power by the public trust. You weaponized that sacred trust. You did not protect and serve your community. You hunted and extorted them. You specifically targeted those you believed had no voice, no financial power, and no legal recourse, and you did it out of sheer, unadulterated greed and vindictive spite." She adjusted her glasses, staring down at him with absolute contempt. "You believed your badge made you immune to the consequences of your actions. You believed you were above the law. Let today serve as a permanent reminder to anyone who wears a uniform that the law is a very heavy object to have fall upon you. I sentence you to 144 months in federal prison, to be served consecutively with no possibility of early release or parole. 12 years. As the heavy-set U.S. Marshals grabbed Dempsey by the arms to lead him toward the holding cells, he stopped. He looked back over his shoulder into the packed gallery. He bypassed the reporters and the victims, locking eyes with Robert Callaway one final time. Callaway did not gloat. He did not offer a triumphant smile. He simply offered a slow, deliberate nod, a silent, chilling acknowledgement of a promise kept. The district attorney picked up his leather briefcase, turned his back on the disgraced, ruined cop, and walked out of the courtroom, ready to get back to the work of rebuilding his city. The heavy, reinforced steel door of cell 412 slammed shut with a deafening metallic finality that echoed through the bleak corridors of the Federal Correctional Institution in Edgefield. It was a sound Owen Dempsey would have to get used to. He was no longer Officer Dempsey. He was inmate 88492-054. Because of his status as a former law enforcement officer, putting Dempsey in general population was equivalent to a death sentence. The federal prison system overflowed with men who harbored deep, violent hatred for the badge. Consequently, Dempsey was placed in the Special Housing Unit, a segregated wing designed for high-profile inmates, informants, and disgraced cops. It was, for all intents and purposes, solitary confinement. For 23 hours a day, Dempsey sat in a concrete box measuring 6 feet by 9 feet. There was a thin mattress on a steel slab, a stainless steel toilet, and a narrow slit of frosted glass that let in a dull, mocking sliver of daylight. The man who had once roamed the streets of Atlanta in a climate-controlled cruiser, barking orders and watching citizens tremble, was now entirely powerless. He dictated nothing. He controlled nothing. He was told when to wake, when to eat the tasteless, tepid food shoved through a slot in his door, and when to take his single hour of recreation in a chain-link cage under the watchful eyes of armed guards. In the suffocating silence of his cell, the arrogance that had defined his life slowly rotted into a desperate, gnawing paranoia. Dempsey had endless hours to replay the events in his mind. The midnight blue Audi, the smug call to Stan Higgins, the petty joy of watching the DA's car dragged away. He had traded a comfortable life, a guaranteed pension, and his freedom for a momentary thrill of spite. While Dempsey withered in the dark, the city of Atlanta was undergoing a painful, spectacular rebirth. Robert Callaway did not rest on the laurels of his victory. Taking down Dempsey and the Higgins towing extortion ring was only the amputation of the most infected limb. Callaway was determined to cure the whole body. The $6 million class action settlement had bankrupted the political capital of the old guard. Mayor Richard Hughes, terrified of further federal scrutiny, gave Callaway virtually everything he demanded. The Atlanta Civilian Police Oversight Board was officially ratified in January. It was not a toothless committee of political appointees. Callaway ensured the board had subpoena power, independent investigators, and the authority to recommend the immediate termination of officers who violated civil rights. But the remnants of the old Atlanta Police Department did not surrender quietly. Captain Frank Harlan, a 20-year veteran and close friend of the disgraced Chief Miller, attempted to organize a subtle rebellion. Harlan encouraged his patrolmen to engage in a work slowdown, a deliberate stalling of response times to the South Side, hoping the spike in petty crime would force the city to dismantle the oversight board. Callaway saw the mutiny forming before it fully materialized. He called Lucy Jenkins. "Harlan is playing games," Callaway said, staring at weekly dispatch metrics showing response times in minority neighborhoods had inexplicably doubled. "He thinks he can hold the city hostage. He is using the union to shield himself," Jenkins replied. "The patrolmen will not talk. They are terrified of retaliation. We do not need them to talk. We have the data," Callaway said, voice cold and resolute. "Audit the GPS trackers on every cruiser in Harlan's sector. Cross-reference their idle times with the incoming 911 logs. If they are sitting in parking lots while emergency calls are holding, we do not just fire them. We indict them for official misconduct and reckless endangerment." The audit was brutal and swift. Jenkins uncovered that Harlan had explicitly ordered units to stand down on nonviolent calls in the South Side. Armed with the digital proof, Callaway did not bother with a closed-door meeting. He bypassed the department and took the evidence directly to the newly formed Oversight Board's first public hearing. In a packed city council chamber with local news cameras rolling, Callaway laid out the GPS data. He publicly accused Captain Harlan of weaponizing public safety for political leverage. Under the glaring lights of public scrutiny and facing the terrifying prospect of joining Dempsey in federal prison, Harlan's resolve crumbled. He resigned in disgrace the very next morning, taking 3 of his most toxic loyalist sergeants with him. The purge sent a shockwave through the precinct. The message was unmistakable. The era of the untouchable badge was dead and buried. To replace the outgoing rot, Mayor Hughes, heavily influenced by Callaway, brought in an outside reformer as the new chief of police, Chief David Caldwell, a man known for transparency and community-based policing. Caldwell immediately implemented mandatory de-escalation training, strict auditing of all impounds, and a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. On the South Side, the atmosphere slowly began to change. The $6 million in settlement funds began flowing into the community. Families financially crippled by Dempsey's extortion ring received restitution checks. Single mothers got their savings back. Men who had lost jobs because they could not afford to rescue their cars from Higgins Towing found capital to start over. For the first time in generations, residents of the South Side looked at the district attorney's office not as an instrument of oppression, but as a shield. And what of the Higgins family? The criminal conspiracy had fractured them beyond repair. Stan Higgins served his time in a minimum security facility. His marriage to Dempsey's sister was destroyed. Brenda Higgins, the architect of the shell company, avoided prison by cooperating fully and turning over every hidden asset, but she was left utterly destitute. The federal government seized her home, bank accounts, and vehicles. She was forced to move into a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of the county, working night shifts at a fulfillment center just to survive, forever marked as a convicted felon. The empire of petty tyranny had been burned to the ground, but the final chapter of Owen Dempsey's story had yet to be written. 5 years later, the sweltering heat of July had once again descended upon Atlanta. The city was fundamentally different now. Crime rates had stabilized. Police-community relations were experiencing unprecedented levels of trust. Robert Callaway had just won his re-election campaign in a historic landslide, securing over 80% of the vote. He was no longer just a district attorney. He was a rising star in state politics, heavily favored for a future run at the governor's mansion. Evelyn Reed, the chief of staff Dempsey had once intimidated in the rain, was now the deputy district attorney, leading a task force dedicated to cold case civil rights violations. The DA's office was a well-oiled machine of justice, blind to wealth and deaf to the old boy network. Inside the walls of the Federal Correctional Institution in Edgefield, time had not been kind to Owen Dempsey. 5 years in solitary confinement had stripped away his physical bulk and his sanity. His hair had thinned and turned entirely gray. His posture, once broad and intimidating, was permanently stooped. The terrifying reality of his 12-year sentence was an inescapable weight pressing down on his chest every waking second. Dempsey had spent the first 3 years fighting. He had filed endless appeals claiming entrapment, selective prosecution, and that his sentence was disproportionately harsh. Every single appeal was swiftly and mercilessly denied by the appellate courts. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, the public corruption too severe. Desperation is a powerful force. It strips a man of his pride layer by agonizing layer until only a naked, trembling need remains. Having exhausted all legal avenues, Dempsey did the unthinkable. He requested a pen and a single sheet of paper from the prison guard. Sitting on the edge of his steel bed, hands shaking, he wrote a letter to the one man who possessed the power to recommend a sentence commutation to the Department of Justice. He wrote to District Attorney Robert Callaway. The letter was a masterpiece of pathetic manipulation. Dempsey did not truly apologize for the lives he had ruined. He apologized that things had gotten out of hand. He wrote about the mental toll of solitary confinement. He begged Callaway, as a man of God and the law, to show mercy. He asked Callaway to submit a letter of support to the Federal Parole Board to shave a few years off his sentence, promising he would move away, change his name, and never return to Atlanta. A week later, Evelyn Reed walked into Callaway's spacious corner office and dropped a plain white envelope stamped with the federal prison insignia onto his desk. "You are going to want to read this," she said, an unreadable expression on her face. "It is from F.C.Y. Edgefield, inmate Dempsey." Callaway picked up the envelope. He used a silver letter opener to slice it open and unfolded the single sheet of ruled paper. The handwriting was cramped, erratic, a stark contrast to the bold, aggressive citations Dempsey used to write on fabricated parking tickets. Callaway read the letter in total silence. His expression never changed. He did not smile in triumph, nor did he frown in pity. He read the words of a broken man begging for the very mercy he had aggressively denied to hundreds of innocent citizens for years. "What does he want?" Evelyn asked. "He wants a recommendation for a sentence reduction," Callaway replied softly. "He says he has learned his lesson. He says the cage is breaking his mind. Are you going to respond?" Callaway leaned back in his leather chair and looked out the window. Below, the city of Atlanta moved in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He thought about the heat map Lucy Jenkins had generated 5 years ago. The sea of red dots clustered over the poorest neighborhoods. He thought about the single mothers forced to choose between feeding their children and paying an extortion fee to get their cars back. He thought about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of a man who believed the law was merely a tool for his own enrichment. "Mercy is a virtue," Callaway said finally, "but justice is a requirement." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a thick file labeled United States versus Dempsey, archival. He flipped through the meticulously organized pages until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a legal brief or an FBI wiretap transcript. It was a photocopy of a crude, grease-stained receipt from Higgins Towing. The same receipt Callaway had demanded on that sweltering July evening 5 years prior. The receipt for $425. Cash only. Callaway took a thick black marker and wrote 3 words across the top of the receipt. "Denied, serve your time." He did not write a letter. He did not explain his reasoning. He simply folded the photocopy, slid it into a fresh envelope, addressed it back to inmate 88492-054, and handed it to Evelyn. "Mail this," Callaway instructed, "and then close the file. We are done with Owen Dempsey forever." When the envelope arrived at the federal prison, Dempsey tore it open with frantic, trembling fingers, praying for a lifeline. When he pulled out the photocopy of the tow receipt and read the black ink across the top, the last remaining shred of his hope evaporated. The paper slipped from his hands and fluttered to the cold concrete floor. Dempsey sat on his steel bunk, buried his face in his hands, and finally wept. He had towed a car to teach a man a lesson. Instead, he had dismantled his own life piece by piece until nothing remained but the four walls of a cage. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Atlanta skyline, casting long golden shadows across the streets, Robert Callaway left the courthouse. He walked with the confident, steady stride of a man who had kept his promises to his city. He turned the corner and walked into the municipal parking lot. The faded yellow lines of the old fire lane had long since been removed, repainted into perfectly measured, pristine parking stalls. Callaway walked up to his car, the same midnight blue Audi A6. He unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The dashboard lit up with a soft, high-tech glow in the fading light. As he pulled out of the lot and merged onto Mitchell Street, nobody watched him from the shadows. No corrupt officer ran his plates. No tow trucks waited around the block. There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the profound, undeniable presence of justice in a city that had finally learned how to fight back. Power without accountability is a dangerous weapon. But as Officer Owen Dempsey learned the hard way, arrogance is the ultimate trap. He thought his badge made him a king, giving him the right to extort, humiliate, and steal from the vulnerable. But he messed with the wrong district attorney. Robert Callaway did not fight back with yelling or violence. He fought back with the devastating, crushing weight of the law, permanently changing a city and ending a corrupt empire. The hunter became the hunted, and a petty parking dispute ended in a 12-year federal prison sentence. True justice does not boast, it executes.